Moving into Daniel's family home should have been exciting, a fresh start for our new life together. I had imagined laughter, warm conversations, and the quiet comfort of being in a loving family. But the reality hit me almost immediately. The house was grand and beautiful, yet every corner seemed to echo tension, and I could feel the invisible weight of expectations pressing down on me. Margaret, Daniel's mother, was waiting, her expression sharp and calculating. From the moment I stepped inside, I sensed I would have to tread carefully. Daniel, absorbed in his job and the constant hum of deadlines, barely noticed the shift in my mood. He smiled politely at his mother and me, assuming everything was fine. But I could feel Margaret's eyes on me, cold and assessing, as though she were measuring my worth with every move I made. The first day was a quiet test. Margaret gave me a list of chores longer than any I had ever seen. The tone of her instructions was harsh, almost impatient, and the little comments she dropped were like tiny knives. "I hope you can manage this, Emily," she said, voice smooth but laced with contempt. I wouldn't want things to get messy because of someone inexperienced. I smiled, nodded, and worked quietly, feeling the sting in her words, but refusing to let them show. Daniel wandered in occasionally, asking how I was, and I reassured him with a smile, hiding the small knots of anxiety forming inside me. The more I tried to meet her expectations, the sharper her words became. She criticized the way I cooked, the way I arranged the living room, the way I even smiled at Daniel. Every praise she gave me felt hollow, a prelude to the next insult. By the third evening, the tension in the house had grown almost unbearable. I found myself walking on eggshells, unsure of what would set her off next. Margaret seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out my flaws in subtle ways, all while maintaining a calm, almost polite exterior when Daniel was around. I realized quickly that no one, not even Daniel, could see the full picture yet. The quiet humiliation was exhausting, but I resolved silently not to let it break me. I would endure, observe, and wait for the right moment to understand the full extent of what I was stepping into. Emily's first week ends with the uneasy sense that nothing in this household is simple. The tension grows quietly, each insult a whisper of control, each glance a warning that I am under constant scrutiny. I am determined to survive, to keep my dignity, even if it means pretending to be smaller than I am. The second week settled in, and with it, a rhythm of quiet tension. Every day felt like walking through a minefield, unsure which word or action might set Margaret off. She seemed to enjoy testing my patience, watching carefully as I struggled to meet her impossible standards. Her comments grew sharper, sometimes disguised as concern. "Emily, are you sure you know how to handle this? I wouldn't want anything ruined," she said one morning, her voice soft, almost sweet, but the eyes told a different story, judgmental, cold, and calculating. I forced a smile and nodded, pretending to be grateful for her guidance while my stomach knotted. Daniel remained blissfully unaware. He praised me for small tasks, never noticing Margaret's subtle digs. I wanted to tell him, to explain how suffocating it was, but a part of me feared that he would dismiss it, as he often did, calling his mother strict but caring. So I endured silently, focusing on what I could control: my work, my patience, and my observations. I started to notice small inconsistencies in Margaret's behavior. Late at night, when the house was quiet and Daniel asleep, I sometimes heard her speaking softly on the phone, words muffled but urgent. Phrases like "no one can know" and "it must stay hidden" floated through the walls. My curiosity pricked at me, but I told myself it might be family matters, nothing I needed to worry about. Then there were the envelopes. One afternoon, while cleaning her bedroom with her permission, I noticed a stack of neatly sealed envelopes tucked in the back of her closet. Alongside them were bundles of cash, stacked in precise amounts. My heart raced. I had no right to open them, yet my eyes could not resist scanning for hints. A note on top read simply, "For protection." A question swirled in my mind. Protection from whom? Why this secrecy? And why had Daniel never noticed? It was during these quiet observations that I first overheard her whispering a name: Aaron. Aaron must never find out. Daniel cannot know. The voice trembled slightly, betraying fear beneath the usual calm mask. That one name sent a shiver down my spine. Something in the air changed. This was no ordinary tension between a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. This was something deeper, hidden, and dangerous that I spent the nights awake, replaying every word, every gesture. Margaret's control over the household, her obsession with secrecy, and the elusive Aaron, it all hinted at a story I was only beginning to glimpse. I felt trapped, yet strangely determined. I would endure, but I would also watch. I would notice every detail, every small clue, until I understood exactly what I was facing to be by the end of the week. A quiet resolve had settled over me. I would not allow Margaret's power to break me. I would endure her insults, follow her commands, and observe in silence. One way or another, the truth would reveal itself, and when it did, I would be ready. By the third week, the tension in the house had thickened into a constant, heavy presence. Margaret's sharp words had become almost ritualistic, a daily reminder of how little control I seemed to have in this home. Every morning, I woke before anyone else, preparing the breakfast and tidying the rooms in silence, careful to anticipate her criticisms. Even when I thought I had done everything perfectly, she would find some small flaw. "Emily, I don't think you understand how important this is," she said one evening, her voice smooth but sharp. "Daniel's work and reputation rely on order. I hope you can manage." I nodded politely, keeping my tone neutral, but inside, frustration simmered. Daniel's obliviousness was almost painful. He praised my efforts in passing, never seeing the subtle ways Margaret undermined me. He often said, "Don't worry, Emily. She means well." But I knew better. I had learned to read Margaret's eyes, the way they flicked with judgment or narrowed with disapproval. Every glance felt like a test, every word a trap. I kept my distance, careful not to provoke her further, yet determined not to let her crush my spirit entirely. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I began to piece together the fragments of mystery I had been observing. Margaret's strange phone calls, the hidden envelopes of cash, the whispered name of Aaron, it all hinted at something bigger, something she was desperate to conceal. I felt a thrill of fear mixed with curiosity. Who was Aaron? Why did Margaret's voice falter when she mentioned him? And why did she insist that Daniel could never know? One night, as I quietly cleaned the hallway, I overheard a snippet of conversation that made my heart skip. Margaret was speaking into the phone, her voice low and urgent. "You have to stay hidden. Daniel must not suspect. Emily can't know yet." She paused, and I caught my breath. My mind raced. Hidden? Must not suspect? Why was I being kept in the dark? And who was she speaking to? The questions multiplied, each one heavier than the last. The small clues I had been collecting began to form a pattern, though incomplete. There was secrecy, deception, and fear, an invisible web Margaret had woven over the household. The more I watched, the more I realized that surviving in this home required more than patience. It required careful observation, restraint, and strategy. I could no longer allow myself to be simply pushed around, insulted, or ignored. I had to understand the rules of this house, the hidden power Margaret wielded, and the secret she was protecting at all costs. By the end of the third week, I felt a quiet determination settle within me. I would endure her criticisms, navigate the subtle threats, and observe in silence. Every glance, every whispered word, every hidden envelope was a piece of a puzzle I intended to solve. I might be underestimated, called useless, treated as weak, but I was learning. And when the full truth revealed itself, I would be ready. The days that followed felt different. A subtle shift had occurred in the air, one I could not ignore. Margaret's control over the household remained firm, but small cracks began to appear in her carefully constructed facade. I had started noticing the details she tried to hide, the quick glances at the clock before leaving a room, the way she sometimes held envelopes close to her chest, the faint tension in her shoulders when speaking about certain matters. Each observation felt like a breadcrumb, leading me toward a secret I could sense but had not yet uncovered. One evening, as I finished washing the dishes, I heard Margaret's phone ring late at night. The number was unfamiliar. She answered in a hushed voice, pacing the room, and spoke quickly, almost anxiously. "I told you, no one can ever find out. Especially Daniel. It has to stay hidden." Her words hung in the air like smoke. I pressed my ear closer to the door, careful not to be noticed, my pulse quickening. Who was she speaking to? And why did she sound so fearful? The next day, I noticed something else. While dusting her bedroom, I saw a small stack of envelopes tucked behind a row of books in her closet. They were sealed, neatly labeled with dates, and accompanied by small bundles of cash. My curiosity burned, but I reminded myself that I could not act recklessly. These clues, I realized, were pieces of a puzzle that demanded careful observation and patience. Every day, I cataloged what I saw in my mind, noting patterns, timing, and peculiarities. It was during one of these moments of quiet observation that I first noticed Aaron, or rather, the mention of him. Margaret's voice trembled slightly when she whispered his name, always in secrecy. Aaron must not know. Daniel cannot find out. The way she spoke, her urgency and fear barely contained, hinted at a deeper story. Who was Aaron? And why was Margaret so desperate to keep him hidden? My mind raced with possibilities, each one more alarming than the last. Over the following days, I became increasingly cautious, observing Margaret's movements without drawing attention to myself. I watched her leave the house at odd hours, carrying small bags, meeting someone briefly at the end of the street, and then returning as though nothing had happened. My suspicion grew, but I had not yet discovered the full truth. Still, the pieces were beginning to form a pattern: secrecy, fear, hidden meetings, and a name whispered with almost sacred caution. By the end of this week, a quiet tension had settled over me, not the tension of fear, but of awareness. I understood that Margaret's world held secrets far beyond her control of the household. I felt a spark of determination ignite within me. I would endure her insults, observe her actions, and wait. The truth was out there, hidden in the shadows of this home, and I would find it. When I did, nothing would be the same again. The following week, my observations became more deliberate. I had begun to notice patterns in Margaret's behavior, tiny habits that revealed more than she intended. She made frequent trips to her room at odd hours, often carrying small envelopes or bundles of cash. Sometimes she would pause at the top of the stairs, glance around nervously, and then slip quietly out the back door. My curiosity burned stronger with each instance, but I reminded myself to remain cautious. I could not confront her, not yet. I had to know the full story before taking any action. One night, I awoke to the sound of hushed voices. Through the thin walls, I could make out Margaret speaking urgently on the phone. It must stay hidden. No one, not Daniel, not Emily. I can't risk it. Her tone was tight with anxiety. a stark contrast to the calm, composed woman I saw during the day. Something in the urgency of her voice made my stomach knot. This was no ordinary secret. It was something she was desperate to protect. I wondered who she was speaking to and why her fears seemed so deep. The next morning, I noticed another unusual detail. While dusting the living room, I found a small slip of paper behind a decorative frame. It had a name written on it, Aaron. My heart skipped. This was the same name I had overheard whispered in the night. I had no idea who Aaron was, but it was clear that Margaret's secret revolved around him. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he a friend, a relative, or someone more complicated? Why was Margaret so desperate to shield him from everyone? Later that day, I observed Margaret meeting someone outside the house. She spoke briefly, exchanged a small envelope, and then hurried back inside. I could not see the other person clearly, but I noticed the urgency in her movements. This was no casual encounter. It was calculated, deliberate, and secretive. My suspicion deepened. Something illicit, something dangerous, was hidden beneath the surface of our household. Despite the fear building inside me, I remained outwardly calm. I acted as if nothing had changed, performing my chores, speaking politely, and wearing the smile I had perfected over the weeks. Margaret seemed to notice little, perhaps overconfident in her belief that I was naive and powerless. But beneath the surface, I was gathering every piece of information I could, mentally recording every detail, every meeting, every whispered word. By the end of the week, a sense of purpose had taken root within me. I no longer felt like the helpless, overworked daughter-in-law she often mocked. I was learning, observing, and preparing. Margaret may have believed she controlled the household, but I was beginning to understand that power could be challenged quietly, carefully, and with precision. The threads of her secret were slowly unraveling, and I was determined to follow them wherever they led. By the sixth week, the strange patterns in Margaret's behavior had become impossible to ignore. The late-night phone calls continued, always hushed and urgent, always involving that one name, Aaron. Each time I overheard her whisper, my curiosity deepened, and a quiet determination settled within me. This secret, whatever it was, belonged to her alone, but I was no longer willing to remain blind. I needed to understand it fully. One afternoon, while tidying her bedroom under the pretense of helping, I noticed another clue. Margaret had a small drawer locked with a key I had never seen before. The drawer itself seemed ordinary, yet I knew instinctively it contained something important. It was out of habit, perhaps, that I traced my fingers along the edges of the drawer, imagining what might lie within. Documents, money, letters, each possibility more alarming than the last. I did not have the key, but I made a mental note. Every detail counted. Nothing could be overlooked. Later that evening, Margaret made a brief trip to the garage. I pretended to be absorbed in cooking while I watched from the kitchen window. She carried a small, tightly sealed envelope and placed it inside a hidden compartment of an old cabinet. Her movements were precise, practiced, and anxious. It was clear she was hiding something she feared anyone might discover. My pulse quickened. I had been observing for weeks, collecting fragments, and now I realized they were forming a pattern, a story hidden in plain sight. As the days went on, I also noticed a change in her demeanor toward me. Margaret remained controlling and sharp-tongued, but there were moments when her confidence wavered. Perhaps she sensed I was watching, or perhaps the stress of secrecy was finally taking its toll. Either way, I began to see cracks in her carefully constructed mask. These cracks, however small, were significant. They were openings, opportunities for me to gather more evidence, to understand the truth behind her fear and the mysterious Aaron. One evening, I overheard part of another phone conversation. Margaret's voice was low, strained with worry. "No one can know, not Daniel, not Emily. She must not find out yet." The words sent a chill down my spine. Whoever Aaron was, his presence and secrecy had dominated Margaret's life to the point of obsession. It was clear now that this was not a simple household dispute. This was a secret with consequences, one that could affect everyone in the house if revealed prematurely. By the end of the week, I felt a quiet but powerful shift within myself. I was no longer simply the obedient, overlooked daughter-in-law. I had become a careful observer, a silent detective in my own home. Every movement Margaret made, every whispered word, every hidden envelope, I committed them to memory. I would wait for the right moment, continue gathering evidence, and slowly unravel the truth. Margaret's secret would not remain hidden forever. And when the time came, I would be ready. By the 7th week, my patience had begun to shift into a quiet resolve. I realized that observing alone would not reveal the full truth. I needed to follow Margaret, to see where her secrecy led. Early one morning, before anyone else was awake, I quietly slipped out of my room and trailed her from a distance. My heart pounded, adrenaline mixing with fear and determination. I had never done anything like this before, but the sense of urgency was overwhelming. Margaret moved carefully through the neighborhood, glancing over her shoulder as if sensing someone might be following her. I kept a safe distance, hiding behind trees, fences, and parked cars, careful not to be seen. She carried a small envelope, the same kind I had seen her hide repeatedly at home. My mind raced with questions. What was in it? Who was it for? Why was she so desperate to conceal her actions? Eventually, she arrived at a small, quiet cafe tucked away on a side street. She stepped inside and exchanged the envelope with a man sitting at a corner table. He was unfamiliar to me, with dark hair and a calm demeanor. The way they spoke was brief and tense. I strained to hear snippets of their conversation, but it was clear that whatever they were discussing was private, urgent, and possibly dangerous. I noted his name when she whispered it softly. Aaron. My pulse quickened. This was the same name Margaret had murmured in the night. From a distance, I watched them interact. There was no obvious intimacy, but the urgency, the secrecy, and the careful exchange of documents suggested something significant, perhaps even illegal. Margaret returned home quickly, glancing around nervously, her composure restored once she stepped inside. I followed her back to the house, careful to maintain the appearance of a normal morning when Daniel appeared for breakfast. That evening, I confronted my own feelings. I had expected anger or betrayal when I discovered someone meeting Margaret in secret, but instead, I felt determination. This was no ordinary household conflict. Something larger, more serious, was unfolding. The documents, the hidden envelopes, and now this mysterious errand pointed to a story I had only begun to glimpse. I had to know more. I had to understand every detail before acting. I spent the following days watching, noting, and analyzing. Every late-night phone call, every envelope hidden in closets, every tense conversation Margaret had in whispers, each piece was becoming clearer. I began forming a mental map of the secret she was protecting and the connections to Aaron. Each observation strengthened my resolve. I would not let her control the narrative of our household forever. I would uncover the truth, carefully and quietly, and when the time came, I would ACT. By the end of this week, a quiet confidence had taken root in me. I was no longer simply Emily, the overworked and mocked daughter-in-law. I had become a careful observer, patient and vigilant, ready to uncover the secrets hidden in the shadows of this household. Margaret's games were no longer hidden from me, And I knew that the discovery of Aaron was only the beginning. The following week, my vigilance intensified. Every movement Margaret made, every word she whispered in the night, became a clue to unravel the hidden story of Aaron. I could no longer ignore the nagging suspicion that her secrecy involved far more than ordinary household concerns. The late-night calls, the hidden envelopes, and her sudden disappearances were pieces of a puzzle that demanded careful attention. One afternoon, I noticed Margaret hurriedly stuffing several papers into a bag before stepping out. I decided to follow her again, keeping a discreet distance this time. She moved with precision, a practiced routine, as if she had done this countless times before. I trailed her to a small, nondescript building on the edge of town, a place I had never seen her visit. She entered quickly, glancing around, and I hid behind a nearby fence, straining to see through a narrow window. Inside, I glimpsed her meeting Aaron. He appeared younger than I expected, serious and cautious. They spoke in low tones, exchanging documents, their movements careful and deliberate. Margaret's anxiety was palpable, her eyes darting around the room as if she feared being caught. My mind raced. Who was Aaron really? Why was she so desperate to protect him? And why was Daniel kept completely in the dark? After they parted, Margaret returned home, her composure slightly shaken. I waited a moment, then slipped inside after her, pretending to be engaged in chores. My heart pounded as I watched her move through the house, every step measured, every glance calculated. It was clear that she was hiding something far more serious than I had imagined. The hidden documents, the secret meetings, the whispered name, all pointed to a story that could change everything if revealed. I began piecing together the fragments I had observed over the past weeks. Margaret's control, her sharp words, her obsessive secrecy. It was all connected. Aaron was clearly central to whatever she was protecting, and her fear suggested that exposure could have serious consequences. I realized that patience and careful observation were my strongest tools. Acting impulsively could alert her or even put me at risk. That evening, Daniel complimented me on the way I had handled the household chores, still unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I smiled politely, masking the tension within me. Margaret's presence loomed like a shadow, but I was no longer powerless. Every secret she tried to guard, every envelope she hid, every whispered phone call, I noted it all, storing the evidence mentally, preparing for the moment when I could finally understand the full truth. By the end of the week, I felt a mixture of fear and determination. Fear for the unknown depths of Margaret's secret, and determination to uncover it without being discovered. I was learning the rhythm of her household, understanding the timing of her secrecy, and observing Aaron's presence through the fragments Margaret tried to conceal. Slowly but surely, the invisible web she had woven was beginning to reveal itself, and I knew that once the truth came to light, nothing in our household would ever be the same. The 9th week brought a mix of anxiety and clarity. Margaret's secrets were no longer abstract shadows. They had begun to take form in my mind. I could track her movements, her late-night calls, and the carefully hidden documents. And now, Aaron was no longer just a whispered name. He was a presence that connected all the strange, secretive actions I had witnessed. One morning, while cleaning the hallway, I noticed Margaret hastily slipping a thick envelope into her bag. My heart raced, and I decided to follow her again. I kept a careful distance, making sure I blended into the early morning activity of the neighborhood. She walked briskly, her eyes scanning the streets, until she reached a small cafe tucked into a quiet corner. Inside, she met Aaron, and I watched from a distance as they spoke quietly, exchanging papers and what seemed to be cash. The atmosphere was tense, almost charged with anxiety. Margaret's hands trembled slightly as she passed the envelope, and Aaron's expression was guarded, as if he had been expecting trouble. I strained to hear their words, but caught only fragments. No one can find out. Daniel cannot know. We must protect everything. Each snippet made my pulse quicken. The secrecy, the fear, the tension. It was all real, and it involved someone Daniel and I had never met. When they parted, Margaret hurried home, her composure slightly shaken. I slipped back unnoticed, feeling the weight of the truth beginning to press on me. This was no ordinary secret. The documents, the money, the anxious whispers, all pointed to something serious, possibly dangerous. I had to understand it fully before taking any step. Every detail mattered, and I began compiling them in my mind, forming a mental map of the web of secrecy surrounding Aaron. At home, Margaret's behavior remained outwardly normal, but I noticed subtle cracks. She seemed tense, more impatient, and sometimes caught me staring a little too intently. I maintained my calm, pretending to be the same obedient, quiet daughter-in-law, all the while observing her carefully. Her overconfidence made me realize she underestimated my awareness. Daniel continued to remain oblivious. He praised my diligence, commenting on how smoothly the household seemed to run. I smiled, hiding the storm brewing beneath the surface. Margaret's control over him was complete, but my understanding of her secret gave me a quiet strength. I was no longer powerless. I knew the game she played, the lengths she went to protect Aaron, and the consequences of discovery. By the end of the 9th week, I had gathered enough observations to understand a pattern. Margaret's secrecy revolved entirely around Aaron, and her anxiety suggested the stakes were high. I felt a mixture of fear, caution, and determination. I would continue observing, collecting evidence silently, and preparing for the moment when the truth would be revealed. I had to be ready. Margaret's web of lies was intricate, but I had begun to untangle it, thread by thread, knowing that soon, everything would change. By the 10th week, my observations had sharpened into something almost instinctive. I had followed Margaret enough times, watched her every movement, and studied the pattern of her late-night calls. Aaron, the mysterious figure she so carefully protected, had become the central piece of the puzzle. I still did not fully understand their relationship, but it was clear that Margaret's secrecy revolved entirely around him. One morning, I decided to act cautiously yet decisively. I waited until Margaret left the house, carrying a small envelope as usual, and followed her at a safe distance. She moved with practiced precision, weaving through streets and alleys, her eyes darting nervously at every passing pedestrian. My heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination, but I reminded myself to stay calm. Patience was essential. One misstep could expose me. She arrived at a secluded office building I had never noticed before. Inside, Aaron waited. The exchange was quick and tense. Margaret handed him the envelope, her hands slightly shaking, and whispered, "Make sure Daniel never finds out. Emily must not know." Aaron nodded, his face serious and cautious, then disappeared into another room, leaving Margaret to leave shortly afterward. Watching from a distance, I realized that whatever they were hiding was not just a minor secret. It involved documents, money, and potentially serious consequences. Returning home, I tried to blend into my daily routine. I cooked, cleaned, and smiled as if nothing had happened. Margaret, confident in her own control, made no mention of her meeting, nor did she notice my quiet scrutiny. But in my mind, the pieces were coming together. The repeated envelopes, the hidden cash, the whispered warnings, and Aaron's cautious demeanor, it all pointed to something illegal, something that could affect Daniel and me if it came to light. Later that evening, I found a partially open drawer in Margaret's room, revealing more envelopes, letters, and documents. My pulse quickened. I knew I could not confront her yet. I needed the full picture, every detail, every piece of evidence before acting. I began mentally cataloging everything: the meetings, the hidden documents, the secrecy surrounding Aaron. Every clue mattered, and I was careful not to leave a trace of my observations. By the end of the 10th week, a quiet transformation had occurred within me. I was no longer the timid, overworked daughter-in-law Margaret sought to control. I had become vigilant, strategic, and observant. I could sense the tension in Margaret's actions, the fear in her whispered words, and the importance of Aaron in her secret world. I resolved to continue my careful surveillance until I had a complete understanding. Soon, I would uncover the truth, and the hidden story that Margaret guarded so fiercely would finally come to light. By the 11th week, the weight of Margaret's hostility had grown heavier, and I felt it more sharply in my daily life. Every small mistake I made was magnified, every word twisted into criticism. "Emily, you should know better," she snapped one morning, her voice sharp and cutting. "Daniel shouldn't have to deal with your mistakes." I lowered my head, keeping my composure, even as frustration and hurt bubbled beneath the surface. I had learned to absorb the blows quietly, but each one strengthened my resolve to uncover the truth she was hiding. Daniel, as always, remained unaware. He noticed my polite smiles and calm demeanor, never realizing the storm of tension surrounding me. He continued to assume that his mother's strictness was normal, even necessary. I wanted to explain, to tell him how suffocating and manipulative Margaret could be, but I knew it was too early. I had to gather evidence, observe every detail, and fully understand the secret before involving him. Margaret's manipulation became more calculated. She shifted blame onto me for small mishaps, twisted conversations to make it seem as though I was incapable, and even whispered doubts into Daniel's ear. "Emily just doesn't understand the way things work here," she said one evening, her voice smooth but poisonous. "It's not her fault if mistakes happen, but perhaps she should learn how to manage." Daniel nodded politely, none the wiser, while I silently counted each word, each subtle accusation. Meanwhile, the mystery of Aaron continued to dominate my thoughts. Margaret's careful secrecy, the hidden envelopes, and the whispered warnings had painted a clear picture. Aaron was central to whatever she was protecting. And now, I realized that her desperation to control the household was not just about her image. It was about hiding a dangerous secret that could affect everyone if revealed. One evening, I decided to confront my own feelings. Fear, anger, and confusion battled within me, but I also felt a sense of quiet determination. I could no longer allow myself to feel powerless. Margaret's manipulation, her constant criticism, and the shadow of secrecy would not dominate me. I began to plan carefully, thinking about how to gather more concrete evidence without raising suspicion. Every phone call I overheard, every hidden envelope, and every suspicious meeting would be documented silently in my mind. By the end of the week, I felt a quiet, simmering strength building inside me. I understood the danger of acting too soon, but I also knew that I could not remain passive forever. Margaret's control, though powerful, was not absolute. With patience, careful observation, and strategic thinking, I would uncover the truth, expose the manipulations, and ensure that the hidden secrets surrounding Aaron would no longer remain buried. The turning point was approaching, and I was ready to face it. By the 12th week, the weight of Margaret's hostility and secrecy had reached a point I could no longer ignore. Each day was a careful balancing act, fulfilling chores, maintaining appearances, and observing without drawing attention. Her criticisms remained constant, sharp, and deliberate, designed to undermine me at every turn. "Emily, "You really must try harder," she said one morning, her voice smooth but dripping with contempt. I nodded politely, masking the growing strength inside me. Daniel remained unaware, distracted by work and oblivious to the tension simmering in the household. He praised small accomplishments, never noticing the subtle attacks or the calculated manipulation that Margaret practiced daily. I wanted to confide in him, to explain the weight of Margaret's cruelty, but I knew it was far too early. I needed more evidence, a full understanding of the secret before revealing anything. Every phone call Margaret made, every hidden envelope, every anxious glance she cast over her shoulder was a clue. Margaret's behavior grew more erratic as I observed her. She began leaving the house at unusual hours, meeting Aaron in secret, exchanging documents and envelopes, her anxiety barely contained. One morning, I followed her again, maintaining a careful distance. She entered a small office building on the edge of town, where Aaron waited. They exchanged papers quickly, their conversation low and tense. I caught fragments. "Daniel must not find out. Emily can't know yet, keep everything hidden." The urgency and fear in her voice made my pulse quicken. Back at home, I began compiling the evidence mentally. Each hidden envelope, each phone call, each secret meeting contributed to a clearer picture. Margaret's secrecy was not just for control, it was to protect Aaron. The documents and cash I had glimpsed suggested something serious, perhaps illegal, that could impact Daniel if revealed. My patience had been tested for weeks, but now a sense of purpose had crystallized within me. I was no longer a passive observer. I was preparing to act. Margaret continued to belittle me daily, unaware of the quiet storm brewing beneath the surface. I maintained the appearance of the obedient, polite daughter-in-law, all the while cataloging every detail. My resolve grew stronger with each insult, each manipulation, and each small victory of patience. I knew the truth was within reach. The web Margaret had spun around Aaron, the hidden envelopes, and her constant vigilance could not last forever. By the end of the 12th week, I felt a profound shift. I was no longer the timid, overlooked Emily. I had become patient, strategic, and vigilant. The pieces of Margaret's secret were falling into place, and soon I would know the full truth. Every whisper, every hidden envelope, every anxious glance had been a clue leading me to this moment. I was ready. The household's hidden stories were about to be uncovered, and the time for careful observation would give way to revelation. By the 13th week, the pressure in the household had become almost unbearable. Margaret's constant criticism had intensified, each comment designed to provoke guilt, frustration, or self-doubt. "Emily, how can you be so careless?" she snapped one morning, her voice cutting like glass. I swallowed my irritation, kept my face neutral, and reminded myself that every insult was fuel for the plan I was quietly forming. I could endure this, but I would not allow her to control me emotionally any longer. Daniel remained the same, well-meaning but oblivious. He noticed my quiet composure and interpreted it as calm acceptance, never realizing the storm of observation and calculation brewing beneath the surface. He praised my efforts, yet failed to see the subtle ways Margaret manipulated both of us. I wanted to tell him the truth, to reveal the undercurrents of deceit, but I knew it was too early. First, I needed certainty, proof, and understanding. Only then could I act without being dismissed or blamed. Margaret's anxiety over Aaron grew more pronounced. I noticed her pacing, whispering hurriedly on the phone, and sometimes shaking slightly as she exchanged envelopes with him. One evening, I overheard a fragment of their conversation through the thin walls. "If Daniel finds out, everything will be ruined. Emily must not know yet." The urgency and fear in her voice were unmistakable. Aaron's name, whispered with such care, seemed to carry the weight of years of secrecy. My curiosity mixed with concern. I knew now that Margaret's obsession with control had a very real and personal source. At the same time, I began noticing Margaret's attempts to manipulate Daniel against me. She subtly twisted words, cast doubt, and implied that I was careless or incapable. It stung, but I resisted the impulse to react. I knew her behavior was predictable, and every small act of manipulation was another clue to her true priorities. I cataloged everything mentally: her phone calls, hidden documents, meetings with Aaron, and her increasingly tense demeanor. Each detail brought me closer to understanding the full scope of her secret. By midweek, I felt a shift in my own mindset. Fear and anxiety were still present, but a stronger emotion had begun to take over: determination. I was no longer just surviving in this household. I was learning, observing, and preparing. Margaret may have believed she controlled the narrative, but I was quietly gathering the tools I would need to challenge her. Every late-night call, every hidden envelope, every whispered warning was evidence. I would use it wisely. By the end of the week, I felt a calm confidence. I understood the patterns, the hidden connections, and the tension between Margaret and Aaron. I was no longer the helpless, mocked daughter-in-law. I was patient, vigilant, and ready. The turning point was approaching, and soon I would confront the truth, armed not with anger, but with knowledge, evidence, and the quiet certainty that the household's secrets would finally be revealed. By the 14th week, the pressure in the household had grown unbearable, though I maintained a calm exterior. Margaret's sharp criticisms, constant accusations, and manipulative remarks seemed designed to break my spirit. "Emily, I don't know why Daniel married someone so careless," she said one afternoon, her tone dripping with disdain. I felt a flicker of anger, but I held it down. Reacting would only give her more control. I reminded myself that patience was my weapon, and every insult I endured brought me closer to understanding the full truth. Daniel remained blissfully unaware of the tension that governed our home. He noticed my composed behavior and assumed everything was fine. Sometimes he would praise my efforts, commenting on how smoothly the household ran, completely blind to the subtle ways Margaret twisted situations to paint me as incompetent. I wanted to confide in him, to explain the manipulation, but I knew it was too early. I needed proof, a clear picture, and understanding of the secret before exposing it. Margaret's secrecy surrounding Aaron became more apparent than ever. Late-night phone calls continued, often urgent and whispered, and I noticed the tremor in her voice when she spoke his name. One night, I overheard part of a conversation. "Aaron must never find out, not Daniel. Emily can't know yet." Her voice was tight with fear, revealing the depth of her obsession with hiding him. I realized that this was not a simple family secret. It was a carefully guarded truth, one that Margaret had protected for years. Meanwhile, her manipulation of me intensified. She blamed me for mistakes, exaggerated small errors, and subtly undermined my confidence in front of Daniel. It stung, but I resisted reacting. Every word she spoke, every manipulation she attempted, became part of the larger puzzle I was piecing together. The documents, hidden envelopes, and whispered warnings all pointed to a secret that involved Aaron and possibly legal or financial consequences. By midweek, a quiet determination had settled within me. I was no longer simply surviving. I was observing, analyzing, and preparing. I documented everything mentally, cataloging phone calls, secret meetings, and hidden documents. Margaret's overconfidence made her vulnerable. She believed she controlled the household, but she had underestimated my awareness and resolve. By the end of the week, I felt a strong sense of clarity. I was patient, vigilant, and strategic. Margaret's manipulations no longer frightened me. I had learned the rhythm of her secrecy, the weight of her fear, and the importance of Aaron in her hidden world. I was ready to continue gathering evidence, to prepare for the moment when the truth would be revealed. The household's hidden stories were approaching exposure, and I would be ready to confront them with careful precision and unwavering determination. By the 15th week, I felt a shift within myself. The constant pressure, criticism, and manipulation from Margaret had hardened my resolve. I was no longer merely surviving in the household. I was preparing to act, patiently gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of the quiet, obedient daughter-in-law. Each insult she hurled, each manipulation aimed at Daniel, only strengthened my determination. I had learned to endure, observe, and analyze. It was during this week that Aaron unexpectedly appeared at our home, not in secret, but at the front door. My heart raced. Margaret's composure wavered for the first time in weeks. He introduced himself calmly, but the tension between him and Margaret was unmistakable. I learned that he was, in fact, her son from a previous marriage, a truth Margaret had guarded for decades. His presence explained everything: the secrecy, the hidden documents, the whispered phone calls, and her insistence that Daniel never find out. Aaron pulled me aside privately later that evening. His tone was serious, almost urgent. "Emily, she'll ruin your future if you don't stop her," he warned. My mind raced. I had expected confrontation, but not assistance from the person at the heart of Margaret's secrecy. He explained that Margaret had been using Daniel's identity to conduct illegal property deals in order to protect Aaron, shielding him from exposure and potential danger. The web of lies and control suddenly made sense. Though the danger remained real, I spent that night reflecting on everything I had observed over the past weeks: the envelopes of cash, the late-night phone calls, Margaret's manipulations of Daniel and me, and now the shocking revelation of Aaron's existence and the illegal dealings. Each moment of cruelty and secrecy had been a piece of a puzzle I was finally beginning to see in full. The fear and tension I had felt were replaced by a clear sense of purpose. I understood what I needed to do, and the path forward became evident. From that point on, I acted with careful strategy. I maintained my calm demeanor, pretending to be the same obedient, overworked Emily, all the while collecting evidence, recording phone calls, photographing documents, and documenting hidden messages. Margaret's overconfidence made her blind to my quiet observation. She believed she still controlled the household, but I was slowly turning the tables, preparing for a moment of revelation that would expose the truth in its entirety. By the end of the week, I felt a profound transformation. I was no longer a passive victim of Margaret's cruelty. I had become vigilant, intelligent, and methodical. The turning point had arrived, not through confrontation or anger, but through knowledge and preparation. The secret of Aaron, Margaret's manipulations, and the illegal dealings would not remain hidden. I was ready to take control, and when the time came, Margaret's carefully guarded world would be exposed, and justice would quietly but powerfully prevail. By the 16th week, I had fully embraced my role as a careful observer and strategist. Margaret's sharp tongue and constant manipulation no longer intimidated me. Instead, I had learned to use her overconfidence against her, pretending to be the obedient, timid daughter-in-law while quietly gathering every piece of evidence that would one day expose her secret. Each day, I cataloged her actions: the late-night calls, the hidden envelopes, and Aaron's clandestine meetings with her. Aaron and I began to communicate more openly, though cautiously. He explained the full extent of Margaret's secret. Her illegal property deals, conducted under Daniel's name, were all to protect him, her hidden son from a previous marriage. Margaret had built a wall of deception around him for decades, manipulating everyone in the household to ensure that no one discovered the truth. Erin's warnings weighed heavily on me. If she continues unchecked, your future could be ruined, Emily. You have to be careful but vigilant. I realized that my previous strategy of silent observation was no longer enough. I needed to be more deliberate. I began recording phone conversations whenever Margaret made suspicious calls, photographing documents she tried to hide, and noting every interaction with Erin. I maintained a careful balance, pretending to remain overwhelmed and meek while steadily building a collection of proof. Margaret's overconfidence made her blind to the fact that I was preparing quietly, meticulously, for the right moment. Home, Margaret's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She was tense, her movements sharp, and her eyes darted nervously more often. She continued to blame me for minor mistakes, subtly undermined Daniel, and tried to maintain her illusion of control. But I could sense the cracks forming. Her obsession with secrecy and protection of Erin had consumed her, and she underestimated the quiet strength I had been cultivating. By the end of the week, I had a clear plan. I would remain patient, careful, and methodical. I would continue to observe, gather evidence, and wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Margaret's manipulations, the illegal dealings, and the hidden existence of Erin would be exposed, not through confrontation, but through undeniable proof. I felt a sense of calm determination settle over me. I was no longer the timid, overworked Emily. I was vigilant, prepared, and ready. The turning point had arrived, and the household's hidden truths were about to be brought into the light. By the 17th week, my transformation was complete. I was no longer the timid, overworked daughter-in-law Margaret sought to control. I had become patient, strategic, and observant, quietly gathering evidence while maintaining the appearance of calm obedience. Every insult, every manipulation, every hidden envelope or whispered phone call had become a clue I cataloged meticulously, each one bringing me closer to the full truth. Erin approached me more directly this week, his tone serious and urgent. "Emily, you need to understand everything," he said, lowering his voice. He revealed the depth of Margaret's secret. She had been using Daniel's name for illegal property deals, all to shield him, Erin, from exposure. Her obsession with secrecy had consumed her, and now it extended to controlling the entire household. The realization hit me. This wasn't just about insults or control. It was about protecting a hidden son and maintaining a dangerous lie for decades. I spent hours reviewing my mental inventory of evidence. I had recordings of her late-night calls, photographs of hidden documents, and notes on her secret meetings with Erin. I understood now that every word, every action, and every manipulation was part of a carefully constructed web. Margaret believed she controlled everything, but I was quietly preparing to unravel that web piece by piece. Despite the tension, I continued my outward appearance of calmness. I completed household chores, smiled politely at Margaret, and acted meek, all while maintaining a mental map of her secret actions. Her overconfidence worked in my favor. She believed I was powerless, unable to see the truth, and she failed to notice my growing understanding of her world. That week, I also began planning how to present the evidence when the time came. I wanted the revelation to be undeniable, structured, and precise, leaving no room for Margaret to manipulate the narrative. Every recording, photograph, and document would be carefully organized. The moment of exposure would be calculated, quiet, and powerful, ensuring that the truth could not be denied or twisted. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of clarity and resolve I had never known before. I was ready to act, not impulsively or with anger, but with precision and confidence. Margaret's years of manipulation, the illegal dealings, and the secret of Aaron's existence would finally be exposed. I understood the stakes, the danger, and the impact of the revelation, and I was prepared to confront it all with calm determination. The turning point was near, and I felt a quiet but powerful certainty that justice, truth, and dignity would prevail. By the 18th week, I had entered a new phase: quiet revenge. The months of observation, note taking, and mental cataloging had transformed me from the timid, overworked daughter in law into a patient, strategic force. I had collected recordings of Margaret's late night calls, photographs of hidden documents, and notes on every secret meeting with Aaron. Every piece of evidence was another thread I could pull to unravel the carefully constructed web she had maintained for decades. That I acted calm and composed, the obedient, weak Emily that Margaret expected to see. I smiled, completed my chores, and endured her sharp criticisms without complaint. She was oblivious to the fact that I was quietly preparing, that every word she spoke in malice, every accusation, and every hidden action was being carefully documented. Margaret's overconfidence became my ally. She believed she controlled the household, yet she was blind to the evidence I had amassed. Aaron became a discreet ally in my mission. He shared details about Margaret's illegal dealings, explaining how she had used Daniel's identity to protect him. Each revelation strengthened my resolve. I understood the stakes. Exposing Margaret would not only protect Aaron but also secure my own dignity and independence. I began to formulate a precise plan, thinking through every step, anticipating Margaret's reactions, and preparing for her inevitable attempts at denial or manipulation. I started organizing my evidence systematically. Recordings were labeled with dates and times. Photographs clearly captured the hidden documents, and notes detailed every conversation and suspicious movement. I rehearsed the order in which I would reveal the truth, ensuring that each piece of evidence would build upon the last. My strategy was simple but powerful. Margaret would have no room to maneuver, no way to distort the narrative, and no path to continue her control. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her usual manipulations, unaware that the woman she had sought to belittle and control had grown powerful in her silence. Her insults, sharp words, and attempts to sway Daniel only fueled my determination. I understood now that patience and careful observation were far more effective than confrontation. She had underestimated me, and that miscalculation would be her undoing. By the end of the week, I felt a sense of empowerment unlike anything I had experienced before. I was no longer a passive participant in Margaret's games. I was an active, calculating observer, ready to expose the truth. The web of secrecy surrounding Aaron and the illegal dealings was fully within my grasp, and when the time came, I would act with precision. Margaret's reign of manipulation was about to be dismantled, quietly but decisively, and I was ready to lead the revelation. By the 19th week, the tension in the household had reached its peak. Margaret remained sharp-tongued and controlling, yet I could sense her growing unease. She continued to manipulate Daniel, casting subtle doubts and placing blame for minor mishaps squarely on me. But beneath her confident exterior, I could see cracks forming, tiny moments of hesitation, furtive glances, and anxious movements that betrayed the weight of the secret she had guarded for so long. I continued my quiet preparations, carefully cataloging every piece of evidence I had collected. Recordings of her late-night calls were organized by date and time. Photographs of hidden envelopes and documents were clearly labeled, and my mental notes mapped the sequence of secret meetings between Margaret and Aaron. Each detail mattered. Each piece of evidence would be crucial when the time came to reveal the truth. Aaron had become a discreet ally, offering insight into his mother's manipulations and the illegal dealings she had conducted under Daniel's name. He warned me of the dangers of acting prematurely, emphasizing patience and precision. His presence reinforced the gravity of the situation. Margaret's secrecy was not just personal, it had legal and financial implications that could impact both Daniel and me if mishandled. I maintained my outward calm, performing my chores with care and responding to Margaret's sharp words with practiced meekness. She remained confident in her control, unaware that I had become vigilant, strategic, and methodical. Every insult she hurled, every attempt to manipulate Daniel or me, became further evidence of her obsession and overreach. Her arrogance blinded her to the fact that I had quietly taken the reins of observation and preparation. One evening, as I reviewed the recordings and documents I had collected, I felt a profound sense of clarity. I now fully understood the scope of Margaret's deception, her secret son Aaron, the illegal property deals conducted under Daniel's name, and the years of manipulation designed to protect him. The picture was complete, and the strategy for exposing her had crystallized. I knew exactly how to proceed, step by step, ensuring that every piece of evidence would build a narrative too strong for her to deny. By the end of the week, a quiet confidence had taken root within me. I was ready to act, but only when the timing was perfect. Margaret's manipulations, her legal deceptions, and the hidden truth of Aaron would be revealed in a single, precise moment. The household's long-standing web of lies was about to unravel, and I would be the one to quietly, decisively expose the truth. The tension of weeks of observation and preparation had transformed into a poised readiness, and I felt the calm certainty of someone who knew that the end of deception was near. By the 20th week, my plan had entered its final, quiet stage. I had gathered all the evidence I needed: recordings of Margaret's secret phone calls, photographs of hidden documents, and detailed notes of her clandestine meetings with Aaron. Each piece of information had been carefully cataloged and cross-referenced, ensuring that the truth could no longer be denied. I was ready, and yet patience remained essential. I could not allow a single misstep to alert Margaret or jeopardize the revelation. I continued my outward performance as the meek, overworked Emily. I smiled politely at Margaret, completed every chore with care, and endured her sharp words without complaint. She remained confident, unaware that the woman she had sought to belittle and control had quietly transformed into someone vigilant, strategic, and unstoppable. Her arrogance became my advantage, giving me the perfect cover to prepare for the decisive moment. Aaron provided crucial guidance, helping me understand the final pieces of Margaret's deception. He explained how the illegal property deals, conducted under Daniel's name, had been used to protect him and maintain the secrecy that Margaret had guarded for decades. Each conversation with him reinforced the necessity of precision. I needed to act in a way that left no room for Margaret to manipulate or deny the facts. Every detail had to be undeniable. As the days passed, I mentally rehearsed the moment of revelation. I envisioned presenting the recordings, photographs, and documents in a clear, logical sequence, ensuring that every lie, every manipulation, and every secret connection to Aaron was exposed. Margaret's overconfidence would work against her. She believed she controlled the household, yet she was completely unaware of the quiet storm I had been preparing for weeks. At home, Margaret continued to manipulate Daniel subtly, casting doubt and blaming me for minor mistakes. Each attempt reinforced my resolve. I would no longer allow her to control our lives with fear and deception. The timing had to be perfect. I observed her closely, noting her habits, moods, and the small cracks that hinted at the stress of maintaining her long-held secret. I knew the moment of exposure was approaching, and I was ready. By the end of the week, a profound sense of calm determination had settled over me. I was no longer the timid, powerless Emily. I had become methodical, strategic, and prepared. The evidence was complete, the plan meticulously arranged, and the household's long-hidden secrets were ready to be unveiled. Margaret's control, manipulation, and the hidden truth of Aaron would be exposed, not with anger or confrontation, but with undeniable proof and quiet, decisive precision. The turning point was near, and I was ready to act. The moment had finally arrived. By the 21st week, I was ready to act. Every recording, photograph, and note was organized and prepared. Margaret, as always, remained confident, believing that I was still the timid, meek daughter-in-law she had long sought to control. She had no idea that the quiet observation and careful planning had brought me to this decisive point. The household secrets, the hidden errand, the illegal property dealings, and years of manipulation were about to be exposed. It began at the family dinner I had carefully orchestrated. Relatives had gathered, Daniel was present, and Margaret was blissfully unaware of the storm about to unfold. I stayed calm, serving food and conversing politely, concealing the tension within. Margaret praised her own control, speaking confidently about the household and subtly implying that I had been insufficient. I smiled politely, listening, while every detail of her deceit played in my mind. When the right moment came, I spoke quietly but firmly. "I think it's time everyone understands the truth," I said, holding a stack of documents in my hands. Margaret's eyes widened in shock, and a flush of panic crept across her face. I began presenting the evidence systematically. Photographs of hidden envelopes, recordings of her whispered phone calls, and documents detailing the illegal property deals conducted under Daniel's name. Each piece of evidence left no room for doubt. Daniel's confusion quickly turned to disbelief, then to anger and hurt as he realized the extent of his mother's deception. Margaret tried to interrupt, to twist the narrative, but I remained calm, presenting the evidence clearly and logically. The final revelation came with the mention of Aaron. "Margaret has been protecting someone for years," I said softly. "Her secret son, Aaron, and the illegal dealings have been hidden from all of us." The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation sinking, and Margaret's composure faltered. She attempted to blame me, claiming I had misunderstood, that I had exaggerated. But the evidence was overwhelming. Every phone call, every hidden document, every secret meeting was documented and undeniable. Her web of manipulation, built over decades, unraveled in the quiet, tense air of the dining room. By the end of the evening, the truth had been fully revealed. Margaret sat in stunned silence. Daniel was devastated by the betrayal he had been blind to, and relatives whispered among themselves, processing the scandal. I remained calm, observing the scene I had patiently prepared for weeks. My quiet strategy, meticulous planning, and unwavering patience had succeeded. The secrets that had controlled our household for so long were finally exposed, and Margaret's overconfidence and cruelty had been laid bare for everyone to see. The 22nd week felt like the calm after storm, though the household was far from normal. Margaret's overconfidence had crumbled completely. She sat at the dining table, stunned, unable to speak, her face pale with the shock of exposure. Daniel, still processing the revelation, looked at me with a mixture of hurt, anger, and confusion. Relatives murmured quietly, the tension thick in the room. I stayed calm, holding the final set of evidence in my hands. Knowing that patience had carried me to this moment, I reviewed the events that had led to this point in my mind. Months of observation, note-taking, careful tracking of Margaret's secret calls and hidden documents, and discreet communication with Aaron had all culminated in this moment of quiet triumph. Margaret had been meticulous in her secrecy, But she had underestimated one crucial factor: my ability to observe, analyze, and act with calm precision. Aaron had vanished shortly after the revelation, quietly retreating to avoid the chaos. His presence, however, had been instrumental. He had confirmed the depth of Margaret's deception and the risks involved in exposing it prematurely. With his guidance, I had ensured that every recording, photograph, and note left no room for manipulation or denial. The evidence was undeniable, and Margaret's attempts to twist the narrative fell flat against the weight of proof. Daniel, though hurt, gradually began to understand the full scope of his mother's deceit. The shock of betrayal was evident in his expression, but there was also a flicker of respect for my careful, patient handling of the situation. I had not acted impulsively or out of anger. I had exposed the truth methodically, ensuring that justice and clarity prevailed. Margaret's attempts to deflect blame had failed, leaving her both socially humiliated and legally vulnerable. Margaret's power in the household had ended. She no longer dictated behavior or controlled conversations. Her sharp words, once feared, now fell on deaf ears. I maintained my calm demeanor, focusing on Daniel and the relatives who looked to me for clarity. The exposure had shifted the balance in the household. Where there had been manipulation, cruelty, and secrecy, there was now transparency and understanding. By the end of the week, the household had begun to adjust to the new reality. Margaret, though still present, had lost her dominance. Daniel and I quietly began rebuilding trust, discussing the implications of the deception, and planning for a future free from manipulation. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. My patience, vigilance, and careful strategy had succeeded. Margaret's secret, her manipulations, and the hidden truth of Aaron were fully exposed, and I had emerged with dignity intact, ready to guide our lives forward with clarity and independence. By the 23rd week, the atmosphere in the household had shifted dramatically. The exposure of Margaret's secret and manipulations had left her stunned, humiliated, and stripped of control. Daniel was still grappling with the reality of his mother's betrayal, his trust shaken but slowly beginning to recognize the methodical approach I had taken to reveal the truth. Relatives whispered in corners, absorbing the shocking details of hidden documents, recordings, and Aaron's secret existence. I remained calm, my presence steady, knowing that the work of unveiling the truth had been completed with precision. Margaret attempted to recover her composure, but it was too late. Her words, once sharp and commanding, now carried no weight. She tried to redirect blame, muttering excuses about misunderstandings and miscommunications, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every recording, photograph, and note had been meticulously organized, leaving no room for her to manipulate the narrative. Her decades of secrecy, carefully maintained to protect Aaron and herself, had unraveled in a single, decisive moment. Daniel, though initially furious and hurt, began to see the clarity in my actions. I had acted not out of vengeance, but with careful strategy and patience. The recordings and documents had provided undeniable proof, and Aaron's hidden existence had explained the motive behind Margaret's secrecy. He realized that I had preserved the household's dignity while ensuring that justice and truth prevailed. My calm approach allowed the family to witness the full scope of Margaret's manipulations without chaos or confrontation. As the evening progressed, I guided the discussion, presenting the evidence in a logical sequence so that everyone understood the timeline of deception and secrecy. Margaret's attempts to interrupt or deflect were met with silence, her authority gone. Daniel listened intently, his anger tempered by comprehension. The relatives absorbed the facts, their murmurs of shock turning into quiet acknowledgement of the careful work that had exposed Margaret's lies. By the end of the night, the household had reached a fragile equilibrium. Margaret was subdued, socially humiliated, and aware that her control had ended. Daniel and I began to rebuild trust, discussing how to protect ourselves and the household from further deception. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. My patience, strategic observation, and careful documentation had ensured that the truth prevailed. Margaret's manipulations were exposed, Aaron's hidden existence understood, and the family could finally begin to recover from years of secrecy and control. The 23rd week marked the final stage of the exposure. The truth had been revealed, the manipulations dismantled, and the household had begun its slow journey toward transparency and understanding. I had acted with dignity, precision, and unwavering calm, proving that patience, careful strategy, and knowledge could triumph over deceit and cruelty. Margaret's reign of control was over, and the household was finally free to move forward with honesty, clarity, and trust. By the 24th week, the aftermath of Margaret's exposure had settled into the household like a heavy, silent fog. Aaron had quietly disappeared, leaving behind the relief of his absence, but also the lingering questions of his life and Margaret's long-hidden deception. Margaret herself sat withdrawn, her usual sharpness replaced by an almost fragile defensiveness. She was still physically present, but her control over the household had ended. Every relative who had once deferred to her authority now regarded her with a mixture of pity and disbelief. Daniel's shock was profound. He struggled to reconcile the mother he had known with the woman who had manipulated, lied, and used his name for decades. Yet amidst the devastation, there was also a sense of clarity. He began to understand the depth of Margaret's secrecy, the reasons behind her harshness, and the careful strategy one had employed to uncover the truth. Slowly, he looked at me not just as his wife, but as someone who had protected him and the family with intelligence, patience, and courage. Margaret's legal vulnerability also became apparent. The property deals she had conducted in Daniel's name were now under scrutiny, and whispers of potential consequences reached the relatives. Social humiliation compounded her fear. For years, she had believed she was untouchable, hidden behind her control and secrecy, but the evidence I had gathered left her exposed. She could no longer manipulate, intimidate, or dismiss the truth. Her carefully constructed world had collapsed. I, on the other hand, felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. The months of careful observation, mental cataloging, and strategic patience had paid off. I had maintained dignity, collected undeniable evidence, and revealed the truth with precision. Margaret's manipulations were laid bare, Aaron's existence was acknowledged, and Daniel was beginning to grasp the reality he had been shielded from. My calm, methodical approach ensured that the household could begin healing without descending into chaos or conflict. By the end of the 24th week, the dynamics of the household had shifted irreversibly. Margaret no longer wielded influence. Daniel and I had started to rebuild trust, and the relatives were aware of the truth and the careful strategy that had exposed it. The environment, though tense, was stabilizing. I felt a profound sense of satisfaction knowing that justice had quietly prevailed. The revelations had been handled with precision and dignity, ensuring that the lessons of patience, strategy, and courage would remain long after the initial shock faded. The aftermath was complete. Margaret faced the consequences of her actions. Aaron disappeared from the household equation, and Daniel and I began the slow process of trust and understanding. I had proven that quiet determination, careful planning, and unwavering patience could overcome manipulation, deceit, and long-held secrets. The household had survived, but the balance of power had shifted entirely. By the 25th week, life in the household had settled into a new rhythm. The storm of revelation and exposure was behind us, and the air, though still tinged with tension, felt lighter. Margaret's dominance had been broken, her manipulations fully exposed, and Aaron had quietly disappeared from the picture. The truth, once hidden in shadows and secrecy, was now out in the open, undeniable and complete. I finally felt a sense of closure I hadn't known in months. Daniel, though still processing the betrayal by his mother, began to rebuild trust in me. He apologized for not recognizing the manipulation sooner, acknowledging how carefully and patiently I had handled the situation. For the first time, he truly saw me, not as the timid, overworked daughter-in-law, but as a strong, intelligent partner who had preserved dignity, uncovered the truth, and protected the family from further deceit. Our conversations, once interrupted by tension and fear, now carried sincerity and understanding, laying the foundation for a slowly restored trust. Margaret, on the other hand, faced the consequences of her actions. Social humiliation, strained relationships, and the legal repercussions of her secret dealings weighed heavily on her. Her sharp words, which had once struck fear into everyone, were now met with indifference. The household, once ruled by her manipulation, now functioned with transparency, caution, and a new understanding of honesty and accountability. The control she had wielded so fiercely for years had ended, and there was no path back to her previous influence. In this new chapter, I discovered my own independence and strength. The months of silent observation, careful strategy, and patient endurance had transformed me. I realized that dignity was not something given. It was earned through courage, precision, and the willingness to act decisively when the time was right. I had learned to navigate manipulation, protect those I loved, and ensure that truth prevailed without descending into chaos or confrontation. The household began to heal. Daniel and I worked quietly to restore a sense of normalcy, reinforcing trust and communication. Relatives, now aware of Margaret's manipulations and secrets, treated the household with a newfound respect. I felt empowered, not by revenge, but by knowledge, strategy, and moral clarity. My journey from being belittled and undermined to being respected and independent had reached its conclusion. As I reflected on the months behind me, I understood a profound truth. Patience, careful planning, and unwavering courage could overcome deceit and manipulation. By maintaining dignity and acting with precision, I had transformed my own life and safeguarded the future of those I loved. The secrets were gone, the manipulations exposed, and the household had found a fragile but genuine peace. And in that peace, I had earned respect, independence, and the quiet triumph of truth.